Good evening, everyone. We'll take about a few seconds to let all the folks in. We're expecting a large crowd this evening as we engage in our conversation about cryptids. All right, so I'll go ahead and get started and introduce myself. Hi, I'm Omar Acevedo, and I'm the Literary Program Coordinator at the Mark Twain House and Museum. I am delighted to host this evening's program on behalf of our museum here in Hartford, Connecticut. Tonight, we are welcoming J.W. Ocker and welcoming back B.J. Hollars for a discussion of J.W.'s new book, The United States of Cryptids, a tour of American myths and monsters. I'll be introducing our guests more formally in just a moment, but first I want to thank our sponsors for this event. The Mark Twain House and Museum's virtual programs are produced in part with support honoring Frank Lord, a beloved trustee of the museum who passed away a few years ago. We are happy to honor his memory with these programs. We are also incredibly grateful to the Wish You Well Foundation and Connecticut Public WNPR for supporting all our virtual programs. We encourage you to have your own conversation in the chat alongside our guests' discussion. If you have any specific question for JW and BJ, you can go ahead and post that directly into our Q&A section. We will be posting the link to purchase a signed copy of the United States of Cryptids from our store. By getting your copy through our store, you not only get a signed copy of the book, but it also benefits the House and Museum. Also, please note that you can click on live transcript to see live auto captioning for this event. Now that I've said all that I want to get down, let's formally introduce our guests for tonight. Our moderator is B.J. Hollars. He is the author of several books, most recently Go West, Young Man, A Father and Son Rediscover America on the Oregon Trail. Hollars is the recipient of the Truman Capote Prize for Literary Nonfiction, amongst many other awards and prizes. He is the founder and executive director of the Chippewa Valley Writers Guild and the Midwest Artists Academy, as well as an associate professor of English at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire, and a columnist for the Leader Telegram. Our author is J.W. Ocker. He is the award-winning author of macabre travelogues, spooky kids books, and horror novels. Ocker is also the creator of OTIS, Odd Things I've Seen, which you can find on oddthingsi'veseen.com. This is where he chronicles his visits to thousands of oddities of culture, art, nature, and history across the country and around the world, with photos, articles, and through Odd Things I've Seen, the podcast. His work has appeared on CNN.com and in the Atlantic, Rue Morgue, the Boston Globe, the Guardian, and Time. Now that I've said all that I've had to say, please sit back and enjoy, and don't forget to post your questions in the Q&A. BJ and JW, I will turn this over to you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Omar, for that wonderful introduction. I am so excited to be here tonight with JW. And I guess we'll just kind of get things started, get the conversation moving, so we have plenty of time for Q&A from all of you at home as well. So JW, would you just tell us a bit about how this book came to be? How did you find your way to being the author of The United States of Cryptids?
So I have a background in searching out odd things, and those odd things can be really random. It's a lot of different veins, and I've always been fascinated with cryptids ever since I picked up a John Keel book as a kid.
Yeah.
But this particular project came on the heels of another book I did with this publisher called Cursed Objects, where I went around visiting cursed objects and writing about cursed objects. And they came to me and said, we should do another book like that. What do you think about cryptids? And I love cryptids. But there's lots of books out there. There's lots of great books about cryptids out there. I don't know if I have anything new to offer. There's tons of great cryptid encyclopedias, tons of great investigation books. But then we realized, because I like to visit things, there's this whole untapped world that people don't know about towns that celebrate their cryptids. So literally theming their entire identity around monsters, or erecting statues instead of statues of like settlers and like town founders, settlers of like sea serpents and stuff. So there's this entire tourist industry built around cryptids that I really wanted to get into. So it is a book of monsters. There's like over 70 monsters in there, but it's a book about how towns and people celebrate those monsters. So my joke at the beginning of the book is, I guarantee that you'll see a cryptid. I'm the only book in the entire cryptid library where I can guarantee you'll see a cryptid, because I can direct you to 1,000 welcome signs that have cryptids on them, statues, museums, festivals, mascots, it's just a massive ecosystem. So the second that we kind of hit on that idea, I was all in. That meant I could travel to see stuff. That meant I wasn't just writing and researching and reading old newspapers. I got to like get in the car with my family and go see cool stuff. So that's mostly my motivation for my nonfiction books, is can I get a really cool experience out of it? And the fact that I get a book out of it is like a cherry. It's nice, but like it's the adventure that really kind of makes me like happy.
Oh my gosh, that's that's my whole deal with writing. How much travel can I get? How many tents can I sleep in? Like, it's so fun, you know? And so one thing that you mentioned in the book that really stuck out to me related to kind of the financial side of this is that the crypto tourism is $140 million a year industry. That was like mind blowing. That's a lot of t-shirts and stuff, you know? So I'm wondering if you can tell us more about that. Like, is there a particular town that really knows how to capitalize on its monsters, or is there a monster that really knows how to capitalize on its town? What can you give us an example of one or two that really stand out?
Yeah, totally. Let me give you some context for that. So, you know, what happens is most towns these days, and cities, mostly cities and regions, most of their identity is wrapped around their local sports team, right? So I'm up here in New England, you're just like the Mark Twain house, and if you see somebody wearing a Bruins cap or a Patriots shirt, you know they're probably from this area. They might not be directly from Boston, they might be from Connecticut or New Hampshire, but they are from this area. And that's generally where we get our identities. The other way towns go is they push their local geography, right? They push their mountains and their lakes and their coastlines and their hills and their farmlands, which everybody has. Everybody has geography. So there's really all those things, the sports teams and the geographies are trying to entice people to visit, right? They're trying to say, hey, we have cool stuff, come visit us. The problem is, if we all have that cool stuff, or we, you know, it's not to talk in marketing speak, but there's no differentiator there. So, but if you have in your history, you know, 70 years ago, a gigantic turtle surfaced from a pond and your town went crazy over it for an entire 3 months, that's only yours. You can totally capitalize on that. So I think my favorite towns that really go overboard on that, one is, since I brought the turtle up, Churubusco, Indiana, which is literally turtle themed. If you go there, it just looks like they're obsessed with turtles, right? There's turtle statues. They have a turtle festival every year. The local businesses are themed turtles. Like the local dentist has like a logo that's like a tooth shaped like a turtle, or a turtle shaped like a tooth, one of those two things. They just love turtles, but then you look into it and they don't just love any turtles. They love this one turtle, the Beast of Busco, who they found in a lake outside of town. And then the entire town went crazy, tried to dredge that pond to find that turtle. They introduced sea turtles into that pond to find turtles, sent divers down. They spent an entire season, an entire summer on that. So much so that the farmer who's obsessed with finding that giant turtle went bankrupt. He forgot to farm. He made up for it by selling the farm a year later at a very much inflated rate because it was the home of the Beast of Busco. So that was a great one. Churubusco, Indiana. Rhinelander, Wisconsin is a big one for me because of the hodag. So the hodag is it's basically a panther-sized creature with spikes on its back, giant fangs, giant talons, very spiky creature. It's a creature from the lumberjack tales, which is like a subspecies of cryptids of, back when the lumberjacks in the 19th century, and they're in these old forests, dark, alone, no internet, no phones, nothing but the fire and their own stories and just darkness, absolute darkness around them. They would start coming up with ideas of what creatures were causing certain sounds or certain activities. And the hodag was one of them. And Rhinelander has just grabbed the hodag by every single horn and just themed themselves. There's a massive statue from the Chamber of Commerce. There's merchandise every year. Every Christmas, they release hodag merchandise. There's statues all over town. They have hodag days every year. They have an official day that's dedicated to the hodag. If you go to their website, whatever it is, with Rhinelander.gov, whatever it is, it's not a civic site. It's hard to pay bills at that site or to see who's on the town council. It's a hodag fan site. There's fan clubs, there's video games. It's all about this creature, and they've just embraced it. So that's a good one. Point Pleasant is probably the classic one, the Mothman in West Virginia. They have a giant, so by the way, these towns I'm mentioning, you probably have no reason to ever go there on a given day. The average person in America has no reason to go there. But if you want to know about the Hodag, you go to Rylander. You want to know about the Beast of Busco, you go to Churubusco. You want to know about the Mothman, you go to Point Pleasant. You go see their 8-foot tall gleaming stainless steel statue. You go see their museum. You go to the TNT area. You go, they're a town of 4,000 people, but their Mothman festival every year in September, it's like more than 10,000 people. They double their population for that entire weekend. And that's generally the everybody that does a cryptid festival these days generally patterns themselves off the Point Pleasant festival because it's so successful. And again, you would not even go to this Point Pleasant by accident, probably. You know, you just never do it. There's no reason to go there, but they built an entire identity, an entire tourism, an entire income around a 6-foot tall humanoid insect. So it's that kind of stuff that like thrill. I mean, I love the monsters. I'm a monster guy. I love the monsters themselves, but watching a town just put both arms around that monster and just hug, it just gets me excited. It makes me want to jump in a car and go right there.
Oh my God. It's so funny. The ones you mentioned, those are like my big three. I literally grew up in Fort Wayne, Indiana, 15 miles from Churubusco. So I didn't swim in a lake for years because of the Beast of Busco. When I was doing my own research for that one, I uncovered the 300-foot net that they allegedly used. It was in, the old timer said it was in a horse trough in the basement of the funeral home. And sure enough, there was a net. So I didn't find the turtle, but I found the net. So
that's awesome. I love artifacts. They're my favorite things.
Isn't that awesome? Yes, yes. And Hodag too, as you know, I mean, they will put what's cool about Rhinelander, I'm sure you know it too, is like if you talk to the locals about it, there's kind of this like wink and nod of like, oh sure, the Hodag, it was just here yesterday, you know, like they're firm in their belief. I love it.
Yeah. Way more interesting than just talking about the high school football scores, which is what most small towns have to do.
So smart. You know, I love it. And the phrase I keep using, I think you use a similar one, is embrace the strange, you know, just like own it, you know, both for financial purposes and also cultural purposes. So I'm wondering, is there more to be said about the cultural aspects of it too? Maybe they're kind of one and the same. Maybe it's the same examples, but maybe they're a little different.
No, I love it. I mean, I've even seen so up near me in Vermont, and relatively near me in Vermont is Burlington, and they celebrate Champ, who's a water monster in Lake Champlain, and they've named their local minor league baseball team the Lake Monsters. So they literally have incorporated it as an identity. So I think there's something to be said. You know, I mean, I busted on sports earlier, but when you're a sports fan and you see the logo to your team that you've grown up rooting for decades, there's a happy sensation to that. There's a familiarity. It's almost like, it's probably not like seeing your mom's face, but it's similar to like seeing this like icon that you grew up with that just has such good memories tied up in it. But it is a kind of a corporate, thing that you're kind of investing in with monsters, with cryptids. It's a historical thing, right? That's the beauty about cryptids is, unlike ghosts, right? When you chase ghosts, there's like vague stories and there's a house, whatever. These cryptid sightings are historical incidents. No matter, maybe who knows what they saw, but for weeks, for months, for 2 years, people went crazy trying to find this thing. I call it hunting parties and parties. They either formed hunting parties to go find it, but they also partied to it. They literally themed dances around it, the marketing around it. Businesses made blue plate specials around the creatures. They like really had fun with it, and that happened. So for my research, for the first time in all my nonfiction books, 90% of my research was newspapers, and they would literally follow the incidents article by article, and it was a historical event, just like a Civil War battle or something else historical. I'm not historical stuff, but it's a real event. It was a real thing that happened. So latching onto these potentially real creatures, potentially imaginary creatures, depending on which ones you're talking about, it's grabbing your history in a brand new way that is just a lot more fun and a lot more stuff to do with. That's not, again, everybody has the settler story, everybody has the pioneer story, everybody has the World War II story. This is something that you can do a lot more with because it's only yours, ideally. Unless it's Bigfoot, then everybody has Bigfoot.
That's a whole different matter. We'll get to that too. But I love how the newspapers were a big part of this, because talk about like credibility, like you're reading this in a newspaper, so it must have some legs, whether or not, it gives you a little more.
Yeah, and back then it was like their only source of news. So the golden age of cryptids, in my estimation, is the 1950s and 1970s, or into the 1970s. No internet, TV was 2 channels. It was like, so these newspapers were the source of truth. What they try to be now, they were then, even though they were, again, posting about werewolves and reptilian lake monsters and stuff.
Right. Well, one monster you talk about, which was new to me, it's kind of a little beyond some of the cryptozoological entities here, is the Norfolk Mermaid, which of course isn't a mermaid so much as the town trying to scratch their head and figure out, how do we make a monster? How do we make something people come to town? And so the mass-produced, as you wrote, 130 fiberglass mermaids. Can you tell us more about that strategy as well? It seems pretty savvy to me.
I love it, because in this case, they didn't base it on any history at all. They just grabbed a monster, not at random, because so Norfolk in Virginia is a coast town. There's a big Navy presence. It's a big city, actually. It's not even really a town. But even that city realized that city just, it's Virginia. So they baseball or whatever, sports wise, they follow DC teams usually is what happens in that area. I'm from the DC area, the Maryland side, so I kind of know what that's like. But, they realized even as a city, it's a massive city, very successful city with a massive, naval presence, they needed something to tie this city together. Otherwise, it would just be, American cities tend to be very samey. Like they're, unless you're like New Orleans, sometimes I put Boston in that category. Every single city just feels like it's metal and glass, and it's whatever. It's a whatever, So they're like, we're a whatever. How do we be not a whatever? So they launched. I think one of the big, rich, influential businessmen's wife had gone to Chicago and saw the parade of cows, which is when Chicago just made a bunch of fiberglass cows. Had everybody decorate them. You see this all over the place these days, where a town will grab a bunch of fiberglass things that are unique to them, sell them, have everybody paint them, and then they just put them around town. It's like a scavenger hunt. Well, that was pretty new back then, and Chicago had done it with cows. So they decided they wanted to do it. They don't want to do cows, so they chose the mermaid to tie into their nautical presence and past, right? Which is smart, but they chose a fantasy creature. They didn't choose like a marlin, and they didn't choose a jellyfish, which again wouldn't have differentiated them enough. Like everybody has marlins and jellyfish. Technically, nobody has mermaids, and that helps them. They're like, well, nobody is making a big deal on mermaids. We can do that. So to this day, Norfolk is Mermaid City. It's in their logo. You walk around, there's mermaids everywhere in the gift shops. There's statues. And again, if they had just chosen like angelfish, it wouldn't be as noticeable or as graspable or as again, not to speak marketing speak, but ownable, so the mermaid was ownable because nobody else had done it. So if somebody else had done it, they were the first to do it, right? Anybody in the coast could have claimed mermaids, really, and maybe even people in the middle. I've seen like the Oklahoma octopus, right, where they claim octopuses that live in their lakes. But anybody in the coast could have claimed a mermaid, but Norfolk was the first one to do it, and they reaped the benefits of the first come, first serve.
And if it wasn't a mermaid, we wouldn't be talking about it tonight. So it's clearly working.
Not at all. Not at all.
One of the things I really love about this book is kind of how you divide the creatures and the myths and everyone up by region. And so you've got, your Northeast monsters, your Southern monsters, your Midwest monsters, and of course, the ones in the West. And it seems like there are kind of these hot spot regions. You mentioned the South gets a lot of play, and even the state of Wisconsin, which I was very pleased about coming in from Wisconsin, gets a lot of play. I'm wondering, is there something about the regions themselves or like the yarn spinners from the region? Like, how do we account for these hot spots if they exist?
I think, and this is debatable. Obviously, everything I'm saying that is debatable for sure. But most cryptids come out of the rural areas. Part of the reason, so there are some urban cryptids, right? There's crocodiles in the sewers of New York, right? Those are cryptids. Giant rats are cryptids. And in the book, I have the Nain Rouge, which is a devil in Detroit, which isn't really a cryptid technically, but it's a creature that they celebrate and they have parades around. But most cryptids are from small towns. And there's two reasons for this. One is natural habitat, right? You need that monster to disappear in the brush at some point for it to be a believable story. So you need forests, you need fields, you need lakes, you need natural geography, mountains. You need all these things for a habitat for these creatures. Otherwise, it's not believable. If Bigfoot's roaming down 42nd Street, it's not a story. So you need that. So in the rural areas, they have that. Also, and again, this plays into the golden age being the 1950s, 1970s. You need some boredom. You need some boredom for this to happen, because again, you hear on the radio that there's a wolf woman walking around Mobile, Alabama, in 1953 or whatever, 1972. You take off and go find it, because what else are you gonna do? You're not streaming movies. You're not on your phone. You're not getting DoorDash food to your house. You're looking for something to do. That's why most cryptids, almost every single cryptid story, and by that hyperbole I mean maybe 40%, 30%, start with teenagers in a car at night on the back roads. Every single one starts that way because they're looking for something to do. But so I think those two things, looking for things to do and rural equals like fun, I guess. It's it's a magic formula for like just fun, interesting, weird stuff to happen.
Oh, I love it. I never really thought about those two components, the rule element, which is kind of obvious when you talk about it, but also I was going to ask you about tropes, and I guess I will ask you about tropes. We always get the lover's lane kind of stuff, dark and stormy night kind of stuff. But in all of this research, were there other kind of common threads that you kind of saw maybe played out through different places or different creatures, anything like that?
Yeah, so besides them all starting with teenagers, like a lot of them start. So like
Sure.
the Dover Demon in Massachusetts is teenagers in a car at night. The Bat Squatch on Washington is one teenager in a car at night. Mothman is teenagers in the car at night. These are married teenagers, but they were teenagers in the car at night. So there are a lot of them start that way. The Whitehall Bigfoot is teenagers in a truck at night going night fishing. So that's a big one for me. That's a really big one. The other one is that almost without a doubt, nobody ever gets hurt by a cryptid. So the end of the story is not, and then the cryptid killed 10 people and then got lost in the darkness. Almost never, ever doesn't happen. There's accounts where people hurt themselves running through the woods trying to chase a cryptid. There is, in the mythology, there's some mythology stories like the Snallygaster of Maryland. So the Snallygaster is this giant chicken dragon choking on an octopus looking creature out in Western Maryland. And there's one story of it grabbing a guy and taking it to the top of the hill and feasting on his guts. Not a newspaper account. This is just a folklore story. The folk Bigfoot, or the Beast of Boggy Creek in Folk, Arkansas, it took a swipe at somebody inside of a house. It reached a hairy hand in there and just swiped at somebody laying on a couch. But they almost are never, ever, even the meanest, ugliest, most terrifying cryptids never hurt anybody. So that's good news, I think. But it's also interesting that, these are not tragedies. Like the type of story, if you put a cryptid story into like a drama category, they're not really tragedies. They're not really, they're thrillers. But again, they're not in the horrors. A lot of them are made into horror movies, but they're not really. They're just, they appear, they scare you just by like the shock of seeing something at midnight with glowing eyes, and then they run away. It's like it's very much like a cozy mystery kind of story more than anything else. They're fun to tell around firelight, but there's no real stakes other than a lot of people get a lot of memories and good times out of the chaos.
And I think that's an important part. I mean, when you're telling a story at a campfire, especially like a summer camp, you don't want everyone pissing their pants all night. There has to be some kind of end where no one gets hurt. And so these monsters give us that. That's great. Well, since you mentioned the Snallygaster of Western Maryland, this one really stuck out to me. What's so cool about this book is that, every creature and myth has its own style, its own, way in the world. But what was really kind of surprising about this one was kind of the way it was historically potentially used to kind of, as you wrote, scare enslaved people from escaping, and later scared free people of color from voting. I'd never really thought of kind of that darker side of monsters where it kind of had racial overtones and these sorts of things. Did you come across more of that, or might you say more about this particular example?
Yeah, so my research is much more shallow than that. I was looking for very, very much like, the symbolism of identity and celebration and story. The reason why I came across that, though, because I was interviewing a person in Western Maryland. So I actually lived in Western Maryland for a few years. I have family back there. And even then, I didn't know about the Snallygaster growing up, or the Snarly Yow, which is another local creature. But they have the best names over there. They just don't get out much. And they were in the process of setting up a Snallygaster museum, which I think is still in process. The pandemic set everything back, but they knew everything about it. And they met me at a pizza joint one night, and she just brought tons of materials, including all these newspapers from the 1800s, where the headlines would literally be that people of color should stay home. The monster attacks people of color. And it was such, obviously in hindsight, from like our view of history, whatever, our privileged view of history, such an obviously sheer attempt to, scare people of color. It was that way. So it makes me wonder, and this is a book that I didn't write, obviously, but somebody should write this book, somebody better at this topic. How many of these monsters were invented to do that? Because we know historically, through fairy tales, that they were meant to scare children, right? We didn't want them to wander into the woods, so we told stories of witches in cottages of candy out in the woods. We didn't want them to talk to strangers, so we told stories around that. So we would use these stories to scare kids. So it makes sense that they could be used for much more nefarious purposes. So it wouldn't surprise me if quite a few of our cryptid legends, at least the ones that originated in the 19th century, in the 18th century, probably have a connection to that. I would love for somebody to pick up that topic and run with it. I think it's such an untouched place.
Oh, well, you have planted the seed in here. I think that's a really cool idea. And you're right. There's so much kind of, current opportunity to think about these things in a whole new lens. You mentioned kind of meeting at the pizza place and talking to these people, and they brought the newspapers. And I guess as a writer myself, I'm just kind of curious, how did you find your way to these people? Was everyone pretty accommodating to this story? Were some people kind of standoffish and unsure how you would portray them? Kind of what was the experience working with people and their monsters?
So what I learned was, and I unfortunately didn't get to partake of it as much as I wanted to, because a lot of this was written during the COVID years.
Yeah.
But these people haven't. These people, I say like they're the different species, but they have a culture around this. So they go to. There's a lot of festivals all over the country, cryptid festivals, and they all know each other, and they all like enjoy drawing these creatures and talking about these creatures. But they don't take it so. They're not. In my experience, they're not trying to defend the existence of these creatures at all. Not they use it as kind of a shared interest. So like if you know what a hodag is, or you heard the term Altamahaha, if you know those things, you're suddenly their friends. They don't care who you are, or where you come from, or what you believe about those things. If you can talk about those things or have fun or draw them or do a project around them, they celebrate those things. If you go to these conventions, it's just a party. It's a party. They do have whatever papers, and people try to like test synopsis and theories and do deeper research and find artifacts like you were doing. But at the end of the day, they just found this like really fun topic that is both historical, fantastical, mysterious, all the things you kind of want in a topic, and they just kind of center their life around it or their hobbies around it. And so that's kind of what I found. I didn't usually, when you read accounts of people who are a bit more standoffish, it's usually original witnesses, which obviously this book isn't about. Right. Original witnesses, obviously, especially back in the day, they were a little bit trepidatious about, ruining their reputation, especially if they were police officers, right? So the Whitehall Bigfoot in New York, this was a Bigfoot story, which is pretty typical. But what was atypical about it is the police officers got involved really fast, and a few of them actually saw something. In fact, most of the history of that is told by an actual police officer. So, but they would not put it in their logs. They would not report it. They were terrified that if they were the police officer that saw a giant furry thing, nobody would take their authority or their role seriously in the town, which is probably true. Right. So I see that a lot when I read the accounts. You also see people who, there's definitely hoaxers out there for sure. People who didn't see anything but want some attention. There's people who saw something who weren't sure what they saw, but can't rule out anything. There are people who maybe saw something they didn't understand, and then they get a taste of that kind of. There's a type of celebrity that happens when you see something weird. It happens a lot in the UFO circles, but also happens in cryptid circles, where you get a little bit of celebrity for seeing something weird or experiencing something weird. And then in the telling, you start exaggerating it, and it gets bigger and bigger. And then you start seeing more things and more things. Suddenly you've seen the most Bigfoot on the planet, even though the chance, the most experienced like cryptozoologist and maybe has seen like a footprint, and that's it. Right. So the responses they're mostly genuine. Like, I don't know, the hoaxers are hoaxers, and like they have this certain like the successful hoaxers are the ones that kind of like just enjoy it for themselves. Like they're not trying to never let anybody know they're hoaxing, right? It's just for their own enjoyment. But those people are rare, so usually the story comes out. But I think most of the witnesses, they're just, especially back then. Today it's harder because today it's so easy to fake things, and today there's so much information channels. Like if you go on TikTok right now and just hit cryptid TikTok, you'll see videos like you've never even heard of that are like look like full-figured creatures you've never even seen running across the camera. And it's just so much information that it's getting our attention span goes like that. Nobody's investigating those 30-second TikTok clips like they would, 40 years ago. They put their best journalist on the case to go investigate. Today, you just kind of see it, you move on from it. The next TikTok about, cleaning cast iron, then you go to the next TikTok. Right. It's just not focused on anymore. So like, it's just a different world where to say I saw a cryptid, you just get kind of lost in the deluge of information. Right. I saw Bigfoot. Who cares? I can type that into Google and get 1.7 billion results. Yeah,
swipe right.
So it's exactly. So it's a little bit different these days. But I think the classic people, if you read the interviews, for the classic cryptids that happened again in the 50s, 70s, somewhat the 80s, they definitely have a trepidation. But it's interesting to see those original witnesses because that's where the story comes from, right? So the reason why they are cryptids, it means they're not acknowledged by traditional science. Traditional science says, we don't say it's a real creature until we have a body. Usually, even that's not always true, because when the rest of the world saw a platypus for the first time outside of Australia, they held the taxidermied body in their hand. They're like, "You made this up. You put a duck bill on a beaver. Obviously, this is not a real animal." But mostly, if you have the remains, then you have a real animal. So most of our evidence for cryptids, at least the cryptids that haven't been proven to be real animals, are eyewitnesses, mostly footage, photos. but none of those are enough evidence to like say what it is yet. Again, you need flesh and fur and scales.
Right. Well, something you said earlier, I mean, it strikes me as, in the golden age, 50s, 60s, 70s, these cryptids, you'd see a footprint and there'd be no way to verify it. That would be a big deal and people would research it. And today there's just so much glut of it. We don't even think twice about the actual footage of a Bigfoot walking across a camera, and so it is
just
curious
content.
how it's the content. Yeah.
It's not search for truth anymore. It's just content. Search for content.
That might be it. That might be it. The search for content. I love that. Well, that answered the question then. So to the other one then, the next question. Another thing I love about the book, and I think it's probably coming out right now in our conversation, is that, you're not afraid to get silly. It doesn't have to be like rigorous, serious, methodical research. We're just having a good time. And I'm wondering, which of these creatures kind of really made you laugh? I mean, there was some where I was like laughing out loud. I couldn't even believe this was a thing at all, but I love it. I love that it is a thing. Any like that for you?
One of my favorite moments was something called the infield horror, right? This is in Illinois. The infield horror sounds terrifying. It sounds like the title of a horror movie, right? And then you read the story and you're like, it's terrifying. It's a couple of kids start hearing scratches around the outside of the house. The father comes home, he hears scratches at the front door, gets a gun, blows it open, and there's this 3-legged gray creature with the human torso and glowing eyes, and it sounds terrifying. And this was the one case, though, that I found where the entire town didn't embrace it. The entire town immediately said, "Oh, it's a kangaroo." I burst out laughing, so much so that the eyewitness, he started getting really cantankerous. He started getting really mad that people didn't believe him. He said, no, it definitely wasn't a kangaroo. I had a pet kangaroo when I was stationed in Australia. So the story, and it could be true, but the story just gets weirder and weirder and weirder. But so there's no infield horror days in Enfield, Illinois. Nobody celebrates the infield horror because it's in hindsight, it's just probably so obviously a kangaroo that escaped from the zoo, which kangaroos, American kangaroos are its own like cryptid. But it's just it was such a like a as I did the research, a downward spiral from, oh my gosh, this thing sounds terrifying. Oh, this thing might be terrifying. Oh yeah, it is probably a kangaroo, I guess, and nobody else cares. Like if Enfield had just taken that kangaroo and said, who cares? We're gonna celebrate this thing with festivals and statues, then I'd been way back on cloud 9. But it just degraded into this one guy being mad because his friends didn't believe him. This is the end of the story. So that made me laugh a lot for sure. That was a fun one.
That's a great one. Yeah, what else?
Another one that made me laugh. Let me think about this. Hold on, let me cheat. I have my book right here. Yeah. My book that's not even out yet, by the way. So
it's good stuff.
It doesn't hit until October 11th. Oh, Fresno Nightcrawlers, right?
Those are the ones that
make everybody laugh.
Yep.
Fresno Nightcrawlers in Fresno, California. Literally just a pair of legs walking, a couple of pair of white legs just walking across somebody's lawn. And it's funny by itself, right? And then you hear, oh, there's footage. So you go see the footage, and it is pretty eerie. It's just 2 sets of white legs, no heads, no torsos, just like floaty legs just walking across the lawn. So it's kind of frightening, kind of funny. Then you read the story and you realize, the footage that we have was taken from a security camera that was copied onto a VHS, that was filmed off a TV, that was sent across Spanish television, that was filmed off Spanish television. And it's the most degraded footage of the entire world. And then then if you go see the place where they actually happen, the front yard, it's literally the size of a postage stamp, which means that these Fresno Nightcrawlers are like this tall. They existed. So again, you go from like, this creepy footage to like down the spiral of like, it's still a great story. It just, instead of going like up and being scarier and scarier and more probable, it just gets weirder and scarier and weirder and funnier, and until you're in this tiny front lawn with these like floaty legs just walked across, and that's the story. 2 pair of legs walked across the lawn. The end.
Well, what's really cool about the book too is that you have so many illustrations. Like I'm looking at it right now, these leggy creatures in Fresno, and it cracks me up because these are things we will very likely never see in the world, but we see them all in the book. And
Derek Quinlan is the artist. He's awesome. In fact, he did all the illustrations, and he sent me. I haven't shown this to anybody yet. He sent me some of his original illustrations.
Oh,
so in the book, these are colorized and done cool stuff too. But these are the original like ink like sketches he did of the Mothman, who's my favorite cryptid. The Jersey Devil, who's a classic, right? And then of course the Wendigo, which is somehow a cryptid these days. So I have these originals in my house. But yeah, Derek Quinlan is super talented and is the real reason to buy the book. Not my words. It's his drawings for sure.
Well, you're a good team. I think the combo just, it gives everyone what they want. You know, you get to see the thing you can't see, you get to learn about it and fun stories related to it. It's great. So to give everyone a quick heads up, I think we got a few more quick questions on my end, and then we'd love to really get to the Q&A. So you can start popping those into the Q&A bar pretty soon. We'll get to them within a couple quick minutes. I guess we should talk about the elephant in the room. You make it very clear that Bigfoot is, you're not a fan of Bigfoot. He is an indigenous species, or what was the phrase you used?
Something like invasive species.
Invasive species. That's what it is. Tell me about your beef with Bigfoot. How did this come to be?
I used to love him so much. What happens was, so I wanted a book full of a variety of monsters. We have over 70 in there, right? And I wanted to be towns that celebrated those monsters. But everywhere I went, people were celebrating Bigfoot. So there have been Bigfoot sightings in all 50 states, all 50, not just the Pacific Northwest where he belongs, but all 50 states, Delaware, Rhode Island, Hawaii, they've all had Bigfoot sightings. And for some reason, actually, I'll tell you the reason. We've all embraced Bigfoot. Bigfoot is the number one. If you don't know what a cryptid is, you still know what Bigfoot is. He's famous. He has movies around him. He's all these things. And, you know, when I went to see the Flatwoods monster in Flatwoods, West Virginia, which is a very unique monster. It's actually a robot alien, but it's a very unique monster that happened only in Flatwoods. Only in Flatwoods. They're the only ones. It's a very unique, you see them, and they embrace it really well. They have a museum dedicated to it. They have artifacts around it. They have signage. They have everything you want. They have statues. So they capitalized on that story very well. And then last year, a block away from the Flatwoods Monster Museum, they opened the West Virginia Bigfoot Museum. So we go back to that topic of like, everybody has a Bigfoot. Everybody has a farmland. Everybody has a coast of something. Everybody has a lake. Everybody has a Bigfoot. So like, you know, I'm not going to go to Flatwoods, West Virginia to see Bigfoot. There's a million other places I can go to see Bigfoot, but I will only go to Flatwoods, West Virginia to see the Flatwoods monster. So everywhere I went, I didn't want this to be the United States of Bigfoot. And everywhere I went, I kept coming up against Bigfoot. And so what I did was I went and talked to Loren Coleman. So Loren Coleman is the face of cryptozoology. He has been practicing cryptozoology for over 60 years. He really popularized it in modern culture. If there's a documentary about cryptids, he was in it. He started the International Cryptozoology Museum in the early 2000s in Portland, Maine. He just opened a satellite library in Bangor, Maine, because he lives in Maine. And I've written about him, talked to him a lot over the years. He's a friend of mine. So I went up to him just for this book project. I was like, Loren, let's talk about Bigfoot. He's like, yeah. He's like, everybody that comes into my museum when I'm around, I say, you know, and it's a very, very great museum, by the way. It's like not a lot of these oddity museums are like one person in a small room. This is big. His collection's big. It's run. He has a staff. Go see this place. So he said, yeah, everybody comes into my museum. I say, who's your favorite cryptid? And they're all like Bigfoot. Every single one of them are like Bigfoot. And he's like, when I was a kid, he's like, you know, so Bigfoot only came into the lexicon in the late 1950s in Northern California when a bunch of prints were found and a journalist named him Bigfoot. That's how Bigfoot happened. He said when he was a kid, the most famous cryptids were Yeti and the Loch Ness Monster, right? Creatures that were the width of an ocean, the width of the world away. Very exotic. You couldn't go hunt these things without funding and knowledge. You had to like be able to climb Mount Everest or like drive a boat across the loch. These weren't simple things. These things were like big think and he said those were everybody's favorite. But when Bigfoot came out of the North California forest in the late 1950s, suddenly we had our own monster in our backyards, right? Every single forest could hide a Bigfoot, right? And Bigfoot is one of those categories of cryptids that's like biologically possible, right? It's just a hairy humanoid, which honestly, everybody in this virtual room is a hairy humanoid. So it's just a little bit of extrapolation from that. So I was like, oh, is that the reason? Is that the reason why Bigfoot is so popular? Is it because, you know, he's so accessible? Like any of us could just walk out into a forest and say we're Bigfoot hunting. Is that why? And he's like, that's a fringe reason. He said the real reason why Bigfoot is so popular, I love his answer, is because we're all narcissists. He said, we see ourselves in Bigfoot, right? It's humanoid, it's hairy, it always has a human face with human expressions. We want to be friends with Bigfoot. It's almost like cryptid racism, right? It's like we are drawn to like looking things, right? That's the source of bigotry, bias, prejudice, of everything is that way. It's us, and again, it's a source of every kind of division between us that shouldn't be there. And we have in cryptozoology, we're all fans of Bigfoot because we're cryptid racists. But the way I test that though is Harry and the Hendersons. You remember that movie, 1980s, Jonathan Lithgow?
Yeah.
It's a fun, I don't know how young the audience is here, but it's a fun, family sitcom about a family led by Jonathan Lithgow that hits a giant Bigfoot in the whatever, the woods of Washington State, and take him home, and he becomes part of the family. He's cuddly, they're hugging him, he laughs, he has facial expressions. In fact, most depictions of Bigfoot these days are based on Harry from Harry and the Henderson, not anything else. So, and I thought about that, and I was like, you know what? You couldn't have that movie if it was the Lizard Man of Skateboard Swamp and the Hendersons. That would be a totally different movie. It would not be a fun, family, cuddly movie. You couldn't have the infield horror and the Hendersons even, right? It has to be Harry and the Hendersons. It has to be this fun, lovable thing. So again, we just love ourselves, and that's why Bigfoot's so big. So, so if you're ever at a cocktail party, this is the one Bond mod I want you to take with you. Bigfoot is so popular because we're all narcissists. That's why we love Bigfoot so much.
Man, tough but fair. I think there's some truth to that. That's hilarious.
But for the record, I do love Bigfoot too. It's just you get tired of him when you research cryptids for more than a year, and his furry face just keeps popping up all the time. And I want some scales, and I want some fins, and I want some tentacles and some spikes. But the furry face keeps popping up. You starts being like whack-a-mole. You're like, I don't care about you. I don't care about your story. I don't care about your story. And you try to get to other monsters. But he is present in the book. He's in the Pacific Northwest. There's like smaller versions of him in Pennsylvania that I included if there was unique enough. So there is some Bigfoot in the book. It's just there could have been a ton more if I was not disciplined at all.
It's such an ironic thing that Bigfoot has become so ubiquitous that we don't even bother to look at him anymore. We're sick of the guy. He sucks all the
he's like, he's like an icon now. He's like Batman and Mickey Mouse.
There you go. Well, we have some questions rolling in, so I guess we can turn to them, and then I might ask one more at the end if there's time. Sharon wants to know, have you decorated your home for Halloween?
So this must be one of my readers. So they know, if they're familiar with my work at all, that I celebrate Halloween for like 2 months. I'm in New England, so I get a little bit of a berth for that. I do. So I have my 12-foot tall skeleton set up in front of my black, New England style house. We have our graveyard set up, our ghosts are set up. It's Halloween now, which honestly, these days at 10/4, October 4th, isn't unique. In fact, I would say there were some people in my neighborhood that, not in my direct neighborhood, but in the neighborhoods around me, that beat me to it. So I feel like Halloween is becoming so mainstream that starting to celebrate on September 1st isn't really that unique. I feel like, and again, this also might be the content monster of social media. Right. Starting in August, people are like going to shops and they're like starting to like post stuff and starting to like watch horror movies. So just because they need content in August, there's no other good content but like whatever, shorts and people's feet, whatever. But like, so it is decorated for Halloween. You can probably see this study is always decorated for Halloween. I've got a Salem banner up and I got a witch out there. So I definitely a bit of the Addams family. But yeah, if you happen to drive by my house, and I will know because we live on a cul-de-sac, if you drive by my house, you'll see the giant skeleton looming of a black house.
You're losing your edge. Your neighbors are beating you to it.
Yeah, they are. It's starting to become like, I don't know, it's like I get a little bit contrarian. So like if everybody starts loving Halloween, I might have to be like anti-Halloween or something.
Right. St. Patrick's Day, here we come. Yeah.
Yeah. Nobody's digging it out enough, other than Boston,
A lot of leprechauns in that book, probably. We got Beth with a good question here, and I could vouch this one too. Actually, is your book age appropriate for children? I'll let you take it first.
It's totally age appropriate for children. My daughter, who's here, she's 12. She's read it. She was on all my journeys with me. I'm trying to think of I have to think of every single word of it. But yeah, and again, because cryptids are so non-violent, the stories themselves are rarely that intense. And whatever, I don't curse a lot. So, yeah, it's totally. In fact, I hope your kids do read it because I'm also a middle grade author. A lot of my novels are middle grade, and those are actually probably more intense than this book. But I remember again as a kid picking up a John Keel book. So John Keel is famous for kind of he's a guy that kind of chronicled what happened in Point Pleasant with the Mothman. His book was the Mothman Prophecies, became that Richard Gere movie. He had a book out that I found as a kid, maybe as a young teenager even. It was a small little paperback compendium of supernatural creatures, and the cover was like Loch Ness Monster, Mothman, Bigfoot, and it was like that thing grabbed me by my eyeballs, right? And I think kids, the beauty of cryptids is really it's a sense of wonder, right? So when somebody says I believe in Bigfoot, it's easy to be like to scoff at that and say you're gullible and like whatever. But what they're actually saying is, I believe there's more to this world than we know, which is it's just wonder. And children, that's the one thing that we should be giving children. Like we should be preaching and teaching. We should just be instilling their sense of wonder that the world's big and diverse and you should accept it all. So cryptids in particular are a very good symbol of that. So I would say I'd want every kid to read this book, especially because there's a lot of kids. That'd be a lot of sales. But it is age appropriate for sure. It's a long way to say that, but yeah, definitely rich kid read it. And if you disagree, send me that email for sure.
Oh man, you're so right. And you can like dip into it, you know. So if attention spans aren't there, you just sit down one a night, you'll get through them in 70, 80 days. It's a good way to spend
That's a good point. Story. It's not one narrative, it's like individual short essays. So it's perfect for like bedtime reading.
Yep, it's wonderful. So we got about 11 questions left, so we're going to power through them and get these in as best we can. The next one's from Tracy. Connor, 6-year-old, would like to know which cryptid you think could really be real. If you had to pick one, which do you think could possibly exist?
Yeah, so I answer that by saying there are already real cryptids out there. So what happens is when a creature is rumored to exist, and then it's discovered to exist, this is the curse of cryptozoology, where you suddenly, it's not yours anymore. So like the second we found a colossal squid in the ocean, all those stories of krakens were suddenly validated, right? So, but for cryptozoologists, they'd be like, look, there's krakens are real. And the zoologist would be like, yep, we'll take those. Now it's in the purview of zoology. It's not yours anymore. The coelacanth is one of those, the giant fish that was found in 1938, the okapi, the gorilla. You know, nobody other than people that were in Africa knew what a gorilla was. They didn't believe it. What, a giant muscular humanoid covered in black fur? That sounds like you made that up. They had to bring pelts and skulls into the rest of the world. And they're like, oh, gorillas exist. I guess you're right. So I think the ones that are the most plausible for me are ocean ones. So the ocean is so vast and we haven't found all the creatures. You know, if there's some other kind of sea monster down there, even if it's like the Kodiak dinosaur is a good example of it, which is a gigantic brontosaurian kind of creature that was seen a couple of times out in like the islands outside of Alaska. That's you know, plausible that we could hide something in the ocean. Some kind of primate for sure that we haven't discovered yet. Maybe not as big as Bigfoot, but potentially as you know, like whatever earth shattering as Bigfoot. That's also potentially great. And then aliens. So aliens fall into cryptozoology because they are, even though most of our depictions of aliens are, you know, sentient beings, they're still creatures that science has acknowledged. Science says the potential for extraterrestrial life is vast and true, but we don't believe they've ever visited the earth. Like Roswell didn't have actual bodies, that kind of thing. So I think aliens will be maybe the next one, the next big one we find, you know, that's going to be the one.
You heard it here first, folks. That's awesome. Great. Jamie has one about the Wendigo. I often wonder if the creature is an allegory for starvation.
It is. So the Wendigo is interesting. So over time, so hardline cryptozoologists focus mostly on biologically plausible animals, Bigfoot, lake monsters, American kangaroos, American lions, those kinds of things. But over time, pop culture has wanted more than just Bigfoot and lake monsters. It's like Pokemon. They just want to collect them all. So they've wrapped their hands around anything that is kind of monstrous. So that includes myths, that includes aliens, that includes folklore. Pukwudgies in Massachusetts, which are like sentient. They like wear clothes and like have weapons. Those are in cryptids. Wendigo is an example of basically one culture boiling down somebody else's concept into something very, very small and digestible. So the Wendigo is a Native American lore of upper North America, Canada, Wisconsin, Minnesota, that area. Those tribes are in those First Nation tribes in those areas. Mm-hmm. And it was a very complex thing. It was a cautionary tale. It was a real life tale. For instance, if you did not have enough food to get through winter, you could become a cannibal. But that was taboo for all kinds of reasons. You don't eat people. Even if you're starving, you don't eat people. But that didn't stop some people from doing it. So the Wendigo, and they had like, you know, they had methods for like curing Wendigoism. But like, so it was a cautionary tale. It was a real life thing. It was a myth. It was very complex concept that I'm even kind of boiling down into very simplistic terms. But of course, when we got our hands on it, and I say we is like the white settlers, when we got our hands on it, we're like, it's a monster. And then we just put it in our encyclopedia. So, you know, I think it's valid to talk about for sure as a monster because it is such a good symbol. It's such a rich idea. But that it actually exists as a biological entity is probably not true.
Right. Oh, great question. Great answer. That was awesome.
That's a really good question.
Next one we got here is, what is one of the most unexpected stories you uncovered in your research for this book?
Oh, I got one.
No, perfect.
So Lake Perry, New York. Lake Perry celebrates its lake monster. So it's the Silver Lake sea serpent, which is an oxymoron, right? Sea serpents still live in lakes, but it's called the Silver Lake sea serpent. And it's in Perry, New York. Perry, New York just embraces this sea serpent with both hands. It's on their seal, it's on their bike racks, it's in art on their corners, it's in their businesses. They have giant statues everywhere. It's on their playgrounds. They love this thing. The story, though, is that it was a hoax, like an acknowledged hoax. So the story is a bunch of people saw it in the water of Silver Lake. And then a couple years later, the local hotel burned down and they found the canvas skin of a fake sea monster. So the idea being the hotelier admitted saying, oh, I made that up. It was a hoax because, you know, I wanted to fill my hotel. And he filled his hotel for sure, from tourists, from hunters, from everything, trying to find the sea serpent in this lake. So that's the story. But what I found out, and mostly from Phil Nickel, who's an avowed skeptic, and he's always putting very intelligent wet blankets and otherwise great stories. What he found out was the hoax might not have been real. That there was no record of a hotel burning down, no record of the remains of a fake creature being found, and the way it was described to work actually doesn't work. I mean, it was flotation devices, it was all kinds of stuff that didn't make any sense. So in his estimation, the hoax was a hoax. So I've never seen a situation where the debunker debunks the hoax. That doesn't mean he was saying the sea monster was real either, but he was saying the hoax is definitely not real. And despite all of that, Perry still celebrates their sea monster as they should. So that was one of my biggest surprises, was somebody debunking a hoax and still like celebrating the monster. Like it's like Norfolk. You don't need to actually have a real monster story to celebrate a monster.
That was a very memorable one. The reverse hoax. That's a bold move. You know, I love it. I love it. Richard wants to know, are there any Revolutionary War era cryptids? When did they kind of become popular, at least in America, maybe?
Not really. So again, so what happens with it, and this is probably another like downer topic, much like using monsters to like frighten people away from voting, is that it's a pretty modern phenomenon. Of course, during the settler times, the colonial times, they had all kinds of fears, right? Especially the Puritan times up here in New England. They saw monsters behind every tree, right? They were in this land they didn't know. It was cold. There was like darkness around them. They were trying to build a house for the first time. They're all dying and stuff. And they were seeing monsters everywhere, servants of Satan everywhere, right? But what really happens is most modern cryptids, they really only date back to, you know, maybe the 19th century, late 19th century. But what happens is, you know, people want to give validity to these stories. So they go back in time and they look at Native American myths. And then again, they do the same thing as the Wendigo, where they take stories or myths and they kind of boil them down to be a historical precedent. So we mentioned the Lake Champlain monster, Champ. They usually say the first sighting of him was Samuel de Champlain himself. He saw a serpentine monster on a rock, and the Native American guy said something about it, right? That was the story. Turns out the story wasn't true, or it was a very common creature he saw. So, you know, we try to give validity by attaching it onto First Nation cultures, and it's just not, you know, it's co-opting a culture. Like, again, I'm a big fan of borrowing stuff from other cultures and then mixing it together, but this is just out and out theft to legit, because your purpose isn't to like learn something or share something. It's to legitimize a story you already have. So there's not a lot, honestly. I think the best one might be the Gloucester sea serpent, which is probably the most documented cryptid out there. It was seen for like 2 years in the 1800s, right off the coast of Cape Ann. You know, scientists examined it. People tried to attack it with harpoons. People would just sit out and watch it splash around for 2 years. Today, if you go to Gloucester, if you go down to the historical museum, they have a brass sea serpent just right in front of it, where you would put a pilgrim usually, or maybe a Gloucester fisherman, I don't know. Sure. But they have the Gloucester sea serpent. It's a magnificent creature. It looks like biologically plausible. It's not cartoony. It looks like you could get it tattooed on a biker's arm for sure. It's really awesome. So, you know, there's not a lot to go back that far. And usually what happens is they're describing in the accounts like Revolutionary War before, they're describing animals that we know now today are pretty common, right? One of those is like the jackalope, where jackalopes are fake. They're fake. They're invented by a couple of taxidermists to turn a buck. But there are accounts deeper from hundreds of years ago of horned rabbits. Those horns are actually carcinomas on regular rabbits. So, you know, usually all the stories back in the Revolutionary War days, we hadn't examined the world as much, so a lot more was new and wonderful. So usually those things, they were obsessing about bears and you know, mountain lions and that kind of stuff.
Oh, that's great. The wonder was different back then. I love
exactly. Yeah, it wasn't content.
Right. Michael wants to know about Thunderbirds. Do you discuss them in your book, and does any town celebrate them?
Yeah, so no town has claimed them as far as that goes, which is kind of nice, because Thunderbirds again are a Native American concept. I discuss them in terms. So I went to the Dakotas, South Dakota, North Dakota for this one. So North Dakota, there's a couple of rocks up in the corner of the state, almost where Montana and Canada connect. And there's depictions of Thunderbirds, gigantic birds. So Thunderbirds are basically giant birds, gigantic birds, bigger than any bird ever. They could range from like jet size to like just slightly larger than California condors, depending on the myth. But the stories, these were like, beneficent creatures that caused lightning. They fought bad creatures like giant snakes and killer whales. And so they're engraved in a lot of Native American lore. And there's a couple of rocks out there in Riding Rocks Park that show them. And then if you go down to Bismarck, which is, 4 hours in a diagonal across the state, the local Native American colleges down there, the technical colleges down there, had a bunch of artists put together this gigantic Thunderbird statue. And it's like 4 giant heads, and it's like lightning. I saw it in person. It's amazing. And they have placards all around it that tell the story of both the Native American history and like the one Illinois story, the one modern day story where a couple of giant birds attacked a boy in Illinois and tried to carry it off, whether it was fought off by his mom and stuff. So that's the classic Thunderbird story, is these 2 giant birds that try to carry off a boy in 1970s Illinois. But mostly it's a Native American story, a mythology. But again, not implausible. Giant birds, the California condor is huge. It's massively big. If you saw it, you would think it's not a real bird. It's so big. Right. So, and again, we have prehistoric birds that are gigantic, bigger than that anyway. So again, it's a biologically plausible thing. They existed at one time, and who knows? But again, I have a whole chapter on them in the book for sure, because they are just again, we need more avian monsters. We don't have enough of those. Plenty of Bigfoot, absolutely. Not enough avians.
Good call. Should be a bumper sticker or something.
Exactly.
Connor, 6-year-old Connor wants to know, since Bigfoot kind of gets the most hype, which cryptid kind of gets the least? Is there someone that's especially rare that maybe deserves a little more attention?
Maybe. Usually what happens for those is they're one night only cryptids, right? So they only appear one time to one person, and then they don't appear again. So I had to choose. I tried not to choose those stories when I could, because they're not long enough stories. But every once in a while, I'd have a cryptid impoverished state, like my own home state of New Hampshire here, that didn't have a lot of cryptids. We're not that big a state. We have Bigfoot, of course. We have a lake monster for sure. Everybody has those. But we didn't have anything unique. So for that one, I had to choose a cryptid where a guy goes out, the Dairy Fairy, it's called. I also chose it because it rhymed. So the Dairy Fairy. A guy goes out in his backyard in Derry, New Hampshire, which is named after Derry, Ireland. There's a London dairy tube next door, which is also named after Ireland. He goes out into his forest at Christmas to chop down a Christmas tree. He's got a forest of pine trees. He goes to chop it down, and he sees, while he's out there, like a 3-foot tall, wrinkled skin creature with big basset hound ears. Almost in my head, it's very E.T. like E.T. the extraterrestrial, Steven Spielberg film, plus basset ears. And he goes out there, and the story is, this is one of those stories that made me laugh, actually. He goes out there he has this axe ready to chop him down a tree. He sees this tiny this creature, and they stare at each other, hypnotized for like half an hour. I don't even know how they are hypnotized for half an hour. Maybe the thing had powers, maybe it was extraterrestrial. And then suddenly it just squeaks a scream and runs off into the forest. And that's it. That's the whole story. He definitely writes letters to local astronomers and like actually famous astronomers to talk about it. That's kind of a cool kind of twist on it. But that's the entire story of the Dairy Fairy. Nobody saw anything like it again. It didn't have a population of them in the woods of New Hampshire. It's just this one guy looking for a Christmas tree runs into this one screaming thing that looks like ET, and that's the story. So those one and done creatures, probably the ones that get talked about the least and have the most potential to be interesting stories. Again, less plausible biologically. If you put them into ufology, maybe that they become more plausible, but those are the ones that are the most obscure, I would say.
Awesome, great. And JC wants to know about a favorite New England cryptid. Anything in your neck of the woods that strikes your fancy?
Yeah, so the Rhode Island dragon. I like this one a lot. They call it the Gloucester ghoul or Gloucester ghoul. I never can tell New England pronunciations, even though I've been here for over a decade. So this is a creature. It's a dragon. I finally found a dragon for this United States of Cryptids. I wanted a dragon so bad. And this dragon was found by a local pirate who had been famous for digging treasure in that area. But the thing about it is again, seen twice, like once by a pirate and then once in modern times. But the thing about this dragon, the way they described it was it had giant metal scales that clanked. It looked like it had fire burning inside of it. And so it sounds like a mechanical dragon, but nobody called it a robot. No eyewitness called it a robot or a costume. They just called it a dragon, and then eventually called it the Gloucester Ghoul because that had the alliteration, and you need alliteration for your creature to stick. But again, the fascinating by the idea that maybe it was a hoax. Some smelter built a dragon and wandered around Rhode Island, right? Tiny little small state in the Union, Rhode Island, and just happened to be seen a couple of times. Or that it was just a real dragon with the very hard scales. I like that as well. I just love that it was a dragon, gigantic dragon in the smallest state in the Union, you know? that to me makes
About time. About time. I love it. I love it. Marcia, thanks you for information on the International Cryptozoology Museum. Thank you, Marcia. And Erica asks, I'm not sure if this means something to you. Have you researched not deer? Not deer?
No. I have not heard of not deer at all. I've heard of winged moose. That's another kind of New England one, but I've not heard of not deer. I'll have to. This is also the greatest part about being and you know this too, BJ. The greatest part of being a nonfiction writer is learning stories from the audience. Like every day they tell me something new, and I get to go research it and add it to my list. So
take a note.
Look up not deer.
Great. James wants to know. Oh, I'm sorry, Jamie. Any plans to research and write books about cryptids from other countries? You're gonna go international on us?
Maybe that is a wellspring of it. So obviously North American cryptid, the United States has been around for such a blink of time, like whatever, the UK has lampposts older than our entire country. That would be a take. I mean, I would like it because that level of research and learning, because again, growing up, you kind of know about Bigfoot, you kind of know about lake monsters, you kind of know about living dinosaurs, you kind of know about those things. I want to be surprised by monsters, and the world obviously the world has such, even for me that I'm doused in the topic, such surprises for me. So I would be completely stoked if the publisher came to me and said, hey, US of Cryptids was such a smash hit, you need to do one for Africa, you need to do one for China. I would jump at that chance.
Just get that plane ticket. I know there's a great Mystery Science Theater 3000 song on YouTube I play it for my class, and it's like monsters from across the world, and it's like this rap about them, and it's incredible. It is incredible. You'd love it. Totally check it out. Let's see. James wants to know, says, I'm staring right now at my Lizard Man of Bishopville action figure from the cartoon series The Secret Saturdays. Which other cryptids would you like to see toys made of?
Oh, so which one do I like to see toys made of? Okay, let me find you a good one. There are these days are a lot of toys of everything. If you go into Lauren Coleman's museum, toys are a fascination of his. He calls them our modern day artifacts. So he has toys of just about every monster. But if I had to pick one, it would be I'm going to say the slide rock bolter. You guys know about this thing? This is a whale-sized creature and whale-shaped that lives in the mountains of Colorado. And what it does is it wraps its tail around a peak and just dangles this giant whale-sized body around the rock, and it's camouflage, so it's kind of like an octopus. So if you look at it, it looks like trees and rocks. You can't, as big as it is, it just looks like the mountainside. And what it does is when it sees prey at the bottom, it salivates, and that saliva makes like a slide for it. Basically, it lets go of its hook, uses its weight and the height of the mountain and its saliva to slide down the rock, eat up its prey and whatever trees are in the way, and slide right back up another mountain and hook its tail over and get ready for the next prey. It's like a trap predator. This is another, like the hodag, this is another lumberjack tail, but it's such a unique one. It's such a good one. If this creature doesn't exist, it should exist. A land whale that like attacks you by sliding down mountains on its saliva. I would like to see that. I want that to be an entire playset. I want a mountain. I want to be able to drop him off the side, see him go down and up, and then hook onto the next mountain.
So creative. I love it. I love it. Mattel, get on that one. Andrea wants to know, any thoughts on North American water cryptids such as champy, gigantic catfish in rivers? Anything more on the water creatures?
Yeah. Those are everywhere. So everyone has a reptilian one. So that's another one I had to kind of make a rule. It had to be a unique reptile. I brought up the Oklahoma octopus. That's another one where there's no such thing as a freshwater octopus. No, science has not found a single freshwater octopus. But there are 3 different lakes in Oklahoma that claim to have an octopus. And it's interesting for a couple of reasons. One is I think Oklahoma might be the state that has no natural lakes, that they're all man-made. Wow. So like these lakes didn't exist at some point, and then they existed, and now there are rumors of octopi, sorry. And then the other thing about that is it might be a complete fabrication made up by a TV show 20 years ago, like a documentary. So there's those octopuses. Catfish are great. I love the giant catfish stories. Tennessee has a lot of those. Anything on the Tennessee River. Maryland, there's always, my home state is Maryland. We had them around the dams. There was supposed to be catfish the size of Volkswagen bugs. And there's always a story of the diver going down to fix a dam, seeing one, getting scared, could almost be swallowed by one, leaving, and then never being a diver ever again. So I do like giant catfish are plausible. Like there are real giant, like the biggest catfish is the size bigger than a human being out in, I think, the Philippines or somewhere out there. So they're real. In America, they're not that big, but they're plausible. That's all you need to be scared of them, is for them to be plausible. So I love like catfish, but water monsters in general, there's giant worms that live in some lakes. I think there's Kansas might have one. Sinkhole Sam lives in the sinkhole. So I'm a big fan of lake monsters. Again, lakes, water's scary. There's just something underneath it that you can't see, and if you go down to see it, you'll just drown. Like, this is scary. Water is scary. So like I like water monsters a lot.
That's awesome. What is some advice you'd give to a young cryptid writer or researcher?
Newspapers. We talked about this earlier. Get a subscription to newspapers.com. It's very cheap. Get your parents to buy it, whatever. It's a worthwhile investment. You have access to newspapers from around the country that date back to the 1700s. And you can just search. You'll find stories in that database that nobody else has ever found before. And that's really the first step, because if there is a creature that nobody has seen before in modern day in 2022, chances are somebody saw it at some point in the past and they reported to a newspaper. So it's going to be there. So I always tell them, number one, go to newspapers, research. Number two is just go out in the wilderness and be patient, and bring a camera and practice not getting blurry shots. That's the other part of it. So just go be patient. If they exist, they're going to be hidden. You need, even if you're trying to find real animals that are acknowledged by science. When I say real, I mean acknowledged by science. You need patience to see those. So those are the two things: go camping, enjoy the outdoors, look for them there, and research in newspapers. Those are two big things I would do, and very easily done by anybody.
It's good advice. It's good advice. Catherine has a great question here that gives you a chance to highlight a really cool feature of the book. She asks, does your book say which towns and cities have festivals for cryptids?
Yeah, so I made sure, so we actually killed most of my bibliography. So I had room to actually give you guys an actual travelogue. So there are, in the back of the book, there are addresses, GPS coordinates of every statue I mentioned, which is like some 40 statues, every town that embraces something with like a festival, every museum is in there, and every festival is in there, and then the approximate dates. Again, they're gonna be a little bit wiggly because COVID interrupted a lot of stuff, but there's enough in there for you to tour the entire country on, for sure.
Awesome. That's really cool. I love that. I got a plan for years ahead of me now. Pamela wants to know if the chupacabra of the Southwest is included.
Yes, chupacabra is a great story because it's one that I'd say probably top 5, maybe top 10 cryptids as far as notoriety, as far as being famous. But it's a brand new cryptid. It wasn't discovered till 1995. After digging into the story of it, there might have been another case in the 1970s, but that didn't come out until 1995 when chupacabra became a thing. Put it this way: when chupacabra became a thing, the X-Files was already a series. So it was like 1 year between chupacabra being acknowledged and chupacabra being an X-Files episode. So that's another one interesting, because there's a whole category of cryptids that might have been influenced by Hollywood, and the chupacabra is one of those, because the first witness of the actual creature, not of its like insanguinated victims, had just seen a movie called Species the week before, which is about a spiky-backed alien that eats people. So chupacabra is definitely in there. Both types, actually. There's the alien type with the spiky back, and the blue dog, which is another type of. We don't have time to get into why there's two different chupacabras, but there are, and they're both in there.
Lovely. And we're down to our final 2 questions. Thank you all so much. You've been wonderful. Second to last one, do you cover the Van Meter visitor from Iowa?
Of course. This is another unique one, because again, most stories start with teenagers in a truck at night. This starts with businessmen and bankers downtown. So it's a very, very different story. And it's another avian. It's another rare avian cryptid. It's a pterodactyl-like creature with a horn that emits light. And it's a really good story. Also, one of the rare stories that actually has a kind of a nice ending to it, or an ending to it. Most cryptid stories end with, and it was never found. Right. In this case, they went and attacked it in its lair at the end of the story. So the Van Meter visitor is for sure there, and they have a festival there as well every year.
Awesome. Gotta love that closure. And the final one, speaking of closure, and this is very much a yes or no, I suppose. Can you comment on the melon heads of Connecticut?
Yeah.
Can you?
So this one's a little bit. So there's a whole category of cryptids that are humanoid, that are some kind of race of humans that don't exist anymore. I list some for North Carolina. Their name escapes me right now, but there's a sculpture down there that kind of represents them. They're very pale, like white pale, like very like not white person pale, but like moon pale skin tones. The melon heads are another one where they had oversized heads, and they might have been. There's like stories of inbreeding going on there. There's the Melungians, which are like blue tinted people that lived in the woods. Certain cannibals have certain ancestries that are also in that humanoid category. So I didn't deal with the melonheads directly in this book, but there are plenty of humanoid or sentient cryptids.
Oh, this has been so fun. I'm seeing all kinds of love in the chat. If you haven't yet had a chance to thank JW for coming, please do. I know there's a link for the book also there, The United States of Cryptids. So fun. JW, thanks for hanging out with me tonight. This was a blast.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. This was a lot of fun. I love talking monsters to somebody who loves it as well, including the audience, it sounds like. So
yes,
great.
Good crowd. And thank you, Omar, behind the scenes. And we'll see you all at the next one. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.